The Binding of Isaac is a game that, at the best of times, is really difficult to explain. At the worst of times, or with a certain audience, I am genuinely sure that attempting to elaborate on the game's themes could land you in prison. Maybe I'm a bit overzealous, but if I was hypothetically a cop and some dude I detained for drug possession started explaining to me their latest post-it note completion on the way to the police station, describing their most recent Tainted Lilith run in extreme detail, I would probably follow whatever steps necessary to get that dude into a mental asylum as quickly as humanly possible. Maybe I'm just on the wrong side of history, though. Other than its extremely dark and extremely bizarre story, the gameplay loop is pretty damn fun, and I've really enjoyed my time with the game. For the most part. However, what I wanted to ask and answer today is if you can beat the game as a pacifist. Challenges where you're not allowed to attack with tears have been done before, but I wanted to take it a step further by not allowing any direct damage whatsoever. For example, in a no crying challenge, builds utilizing bombs and powerful active items became the main meta strategies. And although there are lots of really fun synergies you can showcase with that, I feel like becoming a suicide bomber is a little bit disingenuous to a pacifism challenge. So with that in mind, let's jump straight into the rules and into our first run. Firstly, I can't deal direct damage or utilize items that deal direct damage. So no tears, no damaging spacebar items, no bombs, nothing like that. Same thing applies to familiars, like, if a familiar requires me to use the arrow keys in order to utilize it, it's effectively just going to be a dead item. On that note, we're not going to be banning the process of picking up or otherwise obtaining these items, but we're not going to be allowed to use them in any meaningful capacity. That being said, if we do obtain an item that is likely going to cause direct damage to our enemies, whether it be an unlucky pickup or a reroll, we're more or less going to be required to restart and consider that a failed run. Also on a similar note, of course we're going to allow attacks against inanimate objects or something that doesn't feel harm. I don't know why I described it that way, but for example, using bombs on tinted rocks or utilizing our tears to remove obstacles, totally fair game. I really don't think I needed to elaborate upon that, but there are some niche scenarios where this comes into play. Point is though, no direct damage is allowed. What is allowed though is indirect damage from entities that aren't Isaac. So for example, utilizing spider butt against our enemies isn't allowed. However, a box of spiders can be, or really any item that produces flies or spiders automatically, since Isaac is not fly, most of the time. Contact items and orbitals will be on a case-by-case basis, but as a general rule of thumb, I'm not going to be allowed to use them if Isaac is the one doing damage, or if the item is inanimate. Something like Sacrificial Dagger I wouldn't allow. However, I would allow something like Big Fan because it's just a big fan. It kinda does its own thing. Alrighty, with that out of the way, let's get into our first run. And you may be curious as to why I'm specifying our first run. Here's the thing. I don't want to jump on a 100% save, utterly annihilate Blue Baby, and call it a day. Job's done. Instead, I want to kill every end boss on an entirely brand new save. This of course requires me to beat Mom, then go through the process of beating and unlocking Mom's heart, It Lives, Isaac, Blue Baby, Satan, the Lamb, Mega Satan, Hush, Delirium, Mother, and the Beast. So it's gonna be a very long road ahead of us. Starting off, we don't have many characters, but we do have an Isaac. We also don't really have any incentive to play the game on hard mode for the time being, so we get to take it easy on ourselves and do a few normal runs to start. For this run, I managed to start off with Daddy Longlegs, which is one of the very best items in the entire game for us. I have to wait a bit between every attack, but pretty much every time he stomps, it guarantees a kill on base enemies and deals massive damage to boss enemies. And unlike a lot of other items we're going to be seeing throughout this run, I don't have to maneuver around enemies in order to deal damage with it. In fact, it's debatably advantageous to just stay on the other side of the room as far away from enemies as possible just to let Daddy take care of them. This playstyle can genuinely be described as me being Daddy's Discord kitten, and you know what? For the first time in my entire life, I'm actually okay with that. Shit, I mean, the roleplay is actually working out perfectly because I'm playing as an underaged character. A naked underaged character, come to think of it. Jesus Christ. You know what, we're moving on. Luck continued to be on our side though, as this run went from good to fantastic, because on the next 4, I got a fortune cookie from the item room, which allowed me to generate quite a few soul hearts. From my experience in the base game, it's practically a dead item, where every 2 rooms you can hope for the anecdotally 1 in 1 million chance that you get a soul heart instead of an unfunny hint. But for some reason in this playthrough, it kinda carried me. Maybe I just got lucky for once in this godforsaken game. Who knows? As you're going to see, when every run takes upwards of an hour and a half to even 2 hours, the statistically improbable kinda just becomes probable. This run only got better though, because in an attempt to blow up a Tainted rock for soul hearts, I found a crawl space with Forever Alone. Now this is going to be a really sad thing to admit, but attack flies are legitimately going to be one of our most valuable assets in any playthrough. Their damage typically ranges from pretty bad to okay at best, but the ability to do consistent damage at ranged is always appreciated, with a lot of our best damage options either being incredibly slow and or requiring us to essentially be in melee range. Currently that's an okay trade-off, but once we get to the later floors and progression, yeah, I'm not totally sure I'm going to be able to defeat Hush with a cube of meat and a big fan. Back to our current run though, Larry didn't get to have a very fun time, and with the power of a booster pack, I was able to start making some decent progress on the donation machine. The ability to bomb them in future playthroughs and get some more money to buy hearts or even a few specific items is always going to be valuable. It's not necessarily a priority though. Like, if we can get to 600 coins to get the store fully upgraded, we would be pretty happy campers. And Stopwatch is probably one of the best items in the entire game for us. But grinding out the donation machine just isn't the best use of time. Especially when you consider that the most common methods for doing so just aren't going to really be feasible for us. Especially if you were to consider the Keeper. For reasons we're going to get into very soon, green mode is not going to be on the table for us. Back to the run though, the rest of it was pretty straightforward. I'm not going to narrate over every moment of these runs since the gameplay isn't all too exciting, and in fact, it's actually rather repetitive. I'm not saying this to be hyperbolic, some of these runs legitimately go up to 2 hours in length. But the progression and options we have available are pretty interesting, so I would like to focus in on that. Fortunately, with some kiting and a ton of lives at our disposal, everything was pretty easy until we got to Mom, where I was genuinely just scared that I wasn't going to be able to beat her. I know Isaac players have to kill her in every run, so they practically know her attack patterns like the back of their hand. But honestly, even if you know what you're doing, it can still be a challenging fight if your run is struggling. Which by most players' definitions, I'm pretty sure you'd consider our runs struggling. I had to prioritize killing ads with my attack fly, which was a bit troubling because it constantly orbits you. but baiting out the stomp attack and attacking her foot was an effective enough strategy to defeat Mom, and hence unlock the next chapter of the game and this challenge, the womb. Again, like I said at the beginning, Isaac is just a really fucking weird game. With this achievement unlocked, we now have to pay a bit more attention to progression, as in order to proceed past the womb, we need to beat Mom's heart 11 times. Although you can go to the cathedral and Sheol if a devil room or angel room spawns, you need to unlock It Lives before you can guarantee an entrance. There's also a similar dilemma to be found with the dark room and the chest, but we will be talking about them a little bit later. Another thing we should really account for is the achievement, very accurately titled, Everything is Terrible. Unlocking this permanently reduces the health pickups from bosses, increases the chance of a floor being cursed, and soul hearts start to become replaced with half soul hearts, which is overall not very good. So I decided to delay this a little bit in favor of doing a short side quest. So the next run I started off with the Leech, which doesn't deal a lot of damage, but it does regenerate health on every kill, which when combined with a portable IV bag, meant I very quickly got an absurd amount of money and unlocked Cain. This wasn't my main objective, but Cain for the time being is a significant improvement over Isaac, so I went ahead and started my next run with him. Also, I think this goes without saying, but my R key was just absolutely abused throughout this entire video. If you're curious, I didn't just modify the game to replace every starting item with good ones, in massive air quotes, but I'm obviously not going to have a lot of commentary to provide on this riveting gameplay loop. And I will actually add that I tried to make a ton of starts viable. I was making shit like Sissy Longlegs work for its damn money. And let me tell you, Sissy Longlegs takes a while to work for its money. Anyways, on the next Cain run, I started off with Gemini, which is... it's okay. Unfortunately, you have to be pretty close in order for him to do damage, so it is pretty risky to use, but it's par for the course. And it's usually a lot better than having to control an attack fly, even if the attack fly usually does way more damage. Fortunately for us though, we also obtained Little Haunt, which is one of the very best items in the entire game for us. It effectively has global range, locks onto targets extremely well, and it also fears enemies that it attacks. For this run, it combos pretty well with Gemini for the few enemies that I don't want to get in melee range of, but in general, I'm never going to be upset to see this little guy, and he's massively appreciated here. The rest of the run, though, was pretty jank, and it eventually just outright ended when I accidentally picked up the virus, which pretty much just spelled the end of the run, as doing any damage with it would just invalidate the entire challenge. Yeah, that's another fun part about this challenge. Just real quick, imagine if TM Trainer made up a solid 5% of the item pool, and one of the effects it had is literally just restarting your entire save. Yeah, there's a reason I installed this very quirky Curse of the Blind mod. And it wasn't because of Bob's brain. However, before restarting, I decided to stick around on this for a bit longer since it was absurdly good for us. Of course, this did come at the inherent risk that damaging any enemy with the virus means we had to start from scratch. But considering that the only progress we've made so far is 1 kill on Mom, I decided it was actually a risk worth taking. The reason why is because this floor had a blood donation machine, a bunch of slot machines, a store with a reroll machine, and a recharge baby. So it was time to power farm for a few unlocks. But the key highlight and the main reason I decided to go through with this was because I was only 1 item away from potentially unlocking the planetarium. As you may recall, I started this run with Gemini, and along the way I also managed to find Pisces. So all I needed to unlock it was for the shop to reroll into Tarot Cloth or card reading. Fuck yeah. I actually do just really want to stress here how lucky this was. Currently there are only 17 items available that progress this unlock, and the fact that I had to roll into one of 2 specific items out of the literal dozens available in the shop pool was extremely unlikely. But I think it's actually really fitting that I managed to unlock these significantly sooner than I did in my genuine playthroughs. So I guess you could say the stars really aligned here, Although a few items found in planetariums are either useless or even actively detrimental, most of them are good and some of them are just immensely valuable. In my opinion, the best 2 items by far are Mercurius and Saturnus. Mercurius gives us a fuck ton of move speed and basically unlocks speedrun tech. Being able to skip almost every room on a floor with no downside is extremely valuable in a run like this for obvious reasons. Even just the ability to pick and choose our fights is extremely valuable. One thing that you might have been screaming at me to do for this entire playthrough is to just simply bomb my way out of dangerous rooms. But the problem with that is it takes one enemy patrolling slightly too close to the bomb, and the run is over. In fact, the challenge would be over. So with the exception of trap or puzzle rooms, it's just not really feasible to pull off. But that's why Mercurius is really good. I don't know why I said that and started doing finger guns at the mic. Listen, one of the hallmarks of somebody who regularly does voiceovers or voice acting is that they do random hand gestures every time that they enunciate a word or otherwise have to put emphasis on what they're saying. I don't know. Saturnus, on the other hand, is one of the only ways we can ever see Isaac's tears during this playthrough. Or rather, one of the only ways we can ever see them actually doing damage. Most items with an effect that generates tears either require me to cry, or are locked behind using an active item, which obviously means that I wouldn't be able to utilize them. However, unlike most other items, Saturnus is entirely automatic, and activates upon entering a room, regardless of player input. On top of being a fantastic offensive powerhouse, it also steals enemy projectiles, so it's pretty great on both fronts. Its potential for this run is so good that, in the extremely rare chance that planetariums are a part of the spawning layout, it is actually worth it to try and find a key to open it. That being said, it isn't quite an auto-win, as you still have to clear the rooms, and if your initial barrage isn't enough, you're kinda fucked. But if we were to hypothetically get Saturnus and a Lil Haunt or a Daddy Longlegs, or even something more basic like a Friend Zone or Gemini, we kinda just win. That being said, even outside of that extremely niche case, we're going to be seeing planetariums a ton because, assuming the first item room is good, it's almost always statistically better to skip the second item room, so we have a pretty high chance of seeing a planetarium spawn before we reach Mom. And when you consider the fact that the first item room literally has to be good in order to even start the run, it is a gamble, but it is so significantly skewed in the planetarium's favor, it's one that's worth taking consistently. There were a few other things I managed to unlock, but after exhausting the entire floor, I restarted the run by killing myself repeatedly because Guppy's Collar is an item that only procs when you genuinely do not want it to. The run afterwards, though, was pretty uneventful. However, since we're in full side quest mode, we only really had one objective for the run, which we did fulfill, which is unlocking our boy, Azazel. Firstly, Azazel starts off with a charged brimstone attack, meaning it's technically the only character in the game that can utilize familiars that only fire when you do, at least without picking up other items, but that's not why we wanted Azazel. Don't get me wrong, as of current he is definitely our best character because he also starts with 3 black hearts in flight, which are 2 immensely good qualities to have. But the reason why he's so important right now is because we need to unlock him in order to unlock Lilith. Because in order to get Lilith, you need to beat Greed Mode, specifically as Azazel. That being said, this proved to be way more difficult than I initially anticipated because of one massive issue. The silver item rooms do not contain a single usable familiar. I mean, technically there's a cube of meat and ball of bandages, but that's not going to get us anywhere. Fortunately for us, though, our run isn't over as the item rooms above us can contain usable familiars. However, there's a problem. We do not have a key. We need a key in order to unlock the room. So what this means for us is that we have to soft reset until we get 1 of 3 items. Theoretically it's 6 items, but it's essentially 3. That on its own wouldn't be bad. However, we also need the item room to contain a usable familiar. You need to land 2 consecutive high rolls in order for the run to even start. I'm going to throw some napkin math at you as I'm in no way, shape, or form psychopathic enough to comb through item rarity percentiles and every unlock in the game in order to get a precise number. But the silver room contains 64 possible items that can spawn. And of those 64, 3 can reliably unlock the door. Then the actual item rooms themselves have well over 300 items in them, and of those 300, I would say maybe 9 or so familiars would be viable enough to actually start to run. Not viable, by the way. Of those, I'd say probably 3 or 4 are actually viable. Just good enough that I can probably survive the first wave. So with that in mind, according to OmniCalculators.com, the probability of me being able to play the fucking game is about 0.14%. Now, if we were to continue our napkin math, that means, on average, it'll take us about 714 resets until we can begin a run. And if we were to play somewhat optimally, with every reset taking 7 seconds, you're looking at nearly an hour and a half for a run to actually start. Now, of course, with everything probability related, the odds of something happening in an average amount of time is never 100%. So, what could, realistically, take an hour and a half, actually took me nearly 4. Yeah, this footage on screen? Imagine this. For 4 hours. I didn't like it, but eventually, after what seemed like centuries of torment, my prayer was found in the form of latchkey into Best Bud. But, I hate to say it, but you have to take my word on that, because about an hour and a half into this riveting R-key session, I realized it was just a waste of hard drive space to record every reset, so I just started here. I mean, to be totally honest, it's kind of suspect at best. But I decided to keep the run going because, don't get me wrong, although the average YouTube comment section is full of insane people, even I sincerely doubt anybody is going to be extremely inquisitive about Best Bud. Especially so after 4 hours of hard Rs. Like, out of the literal hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of passive items in the Binding of Isaac, it's one of the only 20 or so available items in the game to have an astounding quality of 0. And of all of the quality 0 items, Best Bud is only joined by Dead Bird in being startable runs. I don't think I need to start placing gold blocks in the Binding of Isaac. Anyway, as I've mentioned earlier, a really great thing about Azazel is the fact that he starts with 3 black hearts. Meaning that I was able to activate Best Bud alongside an AoE nuke, which cleaned through rooms pretty handily. And to be totally honest, Best Bud does a pretty freaking absurd amount of damage. I'd say it slices through enemies like a hot knife through butter, but that's being rather disingenuous to the hot knife. Usually its main drawback is the fact that you, of course, need to take damage to spawn it, and it goes away after you leave the room, meaning it's only a very temporary power-up. But that trade-off is significantly better in greed mode, since you only need to proc it once per floor instead of every other room. With this in mind, it did the job well enough until we could unlock our next item, Angry Fly. Which almost softlocked our entire run because its AI is really bad. I don't know why it does this. This isn't a one-off occurrence, it just regularly struggles with one enemy for some reason. I was about to lose my goddamn mind, but then remembered I could bomb myself in order to proc Best Bud, which is far from an intended solution, but is technically a solution. I know Edmund McMillan really loves self-harm items, take that as you will, and I'm sure if he were watching this video and probably not developing eugenics, he would smile and feel slightly vindicated. Oh yeah, this is also a good time to mention, I wasn't sure if I was going to allow myself to use arrow key familiars up to this point, so I didn't use them, which led to me almost dying. A lot. I was at half a heart for the vast majority of the run. Hell, even on the last 4, I had to spend almost all the money I've earned just on soul hearts, and if it wasn't for the intruder and eventually Daddy Longlegs doing all the damage while I ran away from everything like a bitch, I would have had to restart this run all over again. And as I've made extremely clear, I don't really want to do that. I mean, even the Ultra Greed fight finished way closer than I would like to admit. It was just an absolutely grueling 3 minutes of non-stop dodging and kiting what seemed to be an infinite tidal wave of goons, but guess what? I was able to unlock Lilith, and this is where I get to have some fun. Which is a sequence of words that no Binding of Isaac player has ever said in their entire life. Now, before you grab your pitchforks, no, I'm not going to allow myself to use Incubus. In my mind, that's essentially cheating. That being said, Lilith has 2 massive qualities that make her way better than every other character. Firstly is Box of Friends. It goes without saying, but in a playthrough where familiars are pretty much my only damage source, an active item with an extremely short charge time that literally doubles them for a room, yeah, it's easily the best active item we can ever have. It also has some really insane synergies with battery items. For example, tripling, quadrupling, quintupling, or whatevering our familiars is just always a beautiful thing to see. I mean, don't get me wrong, it'd be even better if we could cry. We can't. But still, it's really good. Secondly though, and debatably the best part about Lilith, is that she starts with Cambion Conception. Upon taking enough damage, Lilith will spawn a permanent familiar. This on its own would be extremely good, but what makes it even better is that you can only spawn a familiar out of a set list, which includes Dark Bum, Demon Baby, Incubus, Leech, Lil Brimstone, and Succubus. There is also Lil Abaddon and Twisted Pair, but you have to unlock them before they can spawn through this item, which is actually a really good thing since both of them would be unusable anyways. Also, on that note, Lil Brimstone and Incubus aren't going to be usable, but the remaining followers are so absurdly good that it's actually just completely worth the occasional bad rolls. Dark Bomb allows us to consistently generate black hearts and other miscellaneous goodies. It can be kind of worthless at times, and it's not a desirable first roll for that reason, but it's always a welcome sight to see as a third or fourth, as it can help out so much with health. Also on the topic of health, Leech might be the single biggest glow up of this entire video, as it allows us to consistently regenerate health and hence proc more Cambion conceptions. It's kind of funny, but if we ever roll Leech as our first item, the best course of action is to just directly run into enemies over and over and over again to get more hits on Cambion conception, then stay away as Leech kills everything and regenerates our health back to full, then repeat this cycle over and over again until we get a legion of goons. And this is especially overpowered if there is a blood bank on the floor, or even a sacrifice room. If those conditions align, we kinda just win. Leech also isn't a slouch on the damage front either. It's not our best damage option, but it is a surprisingly good one, and because of that, Leech might legitimately be our very best item in the entire game. Which is really weird to say, but it's true. Also, to continue on Cambion conception, Succubus does a consistent 7 to 10 DPS in an extremely large radius, which makes it the very best AoE option we have available, while still being able to do consistently decent single target damage. Then lastly, we have Demon Baby, which is a rapid fire auto turret, which is one of our very few usable ranged familiars in this playthrough. And of that extremely niche list of candidates, Demon Baby is by far the best one. So altogether, Cambion Conception has our single best item, 2 of our very best items, 1 extremely good item, and 2 low rolls, and with all that combined, our first real Lilith run went shockingly well. I'll be honest, I'm not going to be able to describe every run in a dramatic or cinematic way, as it can get kinda samey at times. Especially now that we have Lilith, as we're kind of just hoping to pop off on Cambion Conception whenever possible. And you can see this in our first run, as we were able to start off with an attack fly, and Cambion Conception into Leech and Succubus. Our third proc ended up being Lil Brim, which was a bit unfortunate, but we finished off pretty strong with Demon Baby. And if you're curious why I'm describing all this so rapidly instead of taking my time going on a floor-to-floor basis, I kind of just want to show you how the endgame looks. Did that look impressive at all? Honestly, if you're familiar at all with this game, I'm going to go ahead and say, probably not. But I'm so used to every boss taking roughly the same amount of time as a full playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 that I'm genuinely just happy. This is quantifiable damage. I can see the health bar going down in real time. That wasn't always the case with this fucking game. And guess what? Not only was this our first kill on Mom's Heart, but this run was also our first kill on the Lamb. Womb 2 had a sacrifice room, and since I had an utterly absurd amount of health and a wafer, I just went ahead and went down there and killed his ass. I even found a boiled baby for the occasion. Just, God, the level of dopamine I had crossing this dude's name off a checklist while circling around him with like 100 goons, it was pretty high. I'm sure you can even hear it in my extremely expressive voice right now. So now all we have left for the dark path is Satan. Neato. But this is where I have to admit something to you all. That last run had a bunch of really great followers that I couldn't utilize, like Lil Brimstone. I love Lil Brimstone. It's incredible, but I can't use it, right? Right? Sorta. So here's this piece of extremely obscure trivia for you. If you plug in a game controller and really lightly, and I genuinely mean tilting the joystick a few millimeters in a certain direction, you can have your familiars fire without actually firing yourself. That being said, there is a massive issue with consistency. Like, I genuinely cannot overstate just how precise you need to be with your movements. And especially within this context, I just don't think I'd be able to learn how to consistently utilize it, because even the slightest nudge too far can just end this entire challenge and set us back to 0. To give you a brief timeline, as of recording this video, I'm not done with the challenge yet. I've made significant progress, don't get me wrong, and I've done all the necessary scripting up to this point, and I've gotten a ton of editing done, but the challenge isn't finished. And do you know how long it has taken me so far? 90 hours! So safe to say, the chances of me accidentally tilting a joystick 1 millimeter too far to the right over the course of almost 100 hours, it's pretty high, and I don't think it's realistically probable that any human could do that. And although I'm sure there are ways around this, for the time being, I just feel like it goes against the spirit of the challenge. And oddly, this isn't the only obscure piece of game knowledge that we'll be referencing in this video, as there is actually one extremely niche bug that we could abuse to more or less trivialize the entire save. However, it's only going to be relevant near the very end of this video. But for the time being, just keep that fact in the back of your mind. Also, remember that segment way earlier with the Angry Fly's abominable AI? I had a run with borderline the best starting layout I've ever seen, with the first 2 rooms having a planetarium, an item room, and a sack room, with the item room having a usable familiar. At least that's what I hoped, but the problem is the Angry Fly is a single-celled organism who is only capable of existing and being a mild annoyance. What in the actual fuck is the point of this thing? I mean, I know it came out in Afterbirth Plus, but the fact that Angry Fly exists as an item that you can pick up in this game means that somebody had to sit down, play through an Isaac run, and think to themselves, yeah, I think this game is pretty good, but it's lacking something. It's lacking a familiar that does literally nothing. There's a lot of familiars that do next to nothing, but there isn't a familiar yet that does literally nothing. And as if that isn't sociopathic enough, they also had to go through the entire process of coding it in, giving it sprite work, giving it attributes, putting it into item pools, and... why? Fortunately for us, though, we quickly ran into a god run not much later with a sissy longleg start into Dead Cat. And by we ran into a god run, what I really mean is that I went into Dingle's boss room, activated Box of Friends, got him extremely low but died after 4 minutes of running circles around the boss, attempted the fight again without the double sissy tech, died after 5 minutes at a much higher health pool, then I decided to go for the classic American gambit of killing myself until I hopefully got something good. Despite this being an inefficient strategy in most cases, Fortunately for us, it paid off, and we managed to birth a demon baby, which miraculously managed to kill the first boss in the game in under 4 minutes. Woo. After that extreme display of talent, I'm just gonna spoil the rest of the run as it was pretty much all downhill from there. Despite trying to birth a legion of goons, we only really had 2 spawns worth anything. The iconic demon baby and a leech. And we didn't get anything else for the rest of the run. The only real highlight was an extremely close mom segment where I was brought down to a single heart extremely early into the fight. But Leech, being the MVP that it is, actually carried me back into the fray, and we managed to kill Mom after God knows how long. And that was kind of it. The reason I'm not giving you an in-depth rundown of this run is because, without hyperbole, it lasted an hour and a half. Have you ever tried a run where Demon Baby, Sissy Longlegs, and Leech are your only damage options? It takes a while to kill literally anything. We did sort of luck out near the end as I went into a cursed room during Womb 2, picked up an actual damage option in Curse of the Tower, which is just a really sad thing to say, and was also teleported to a devil room where I could potentially descend into Shield to kill Satan. I decided to take that opportunity so I could cross off the dark path and exclusively go through the light path in the future. As you probably know if you play Isaac, the light route is not only much easier when compared to the dark route, but the chest gives rewards that don't require me to sacrifice my extremely precious health, and because of that, it's overall just a much nicer time. Also, the Polaroid is actually a massively impactful item for us, while the negative just isn't. So yeah, say bye-bye to Satan. Also, on a health note, there is an important discussion to be had with devil deals versus angel deals. There's a few problems we're running into that are going to very quickly make devil deals entirely obsolete. Firstly, in regards to defensive items, there's no discussion to be had. Angel rooms just win. Outright. I mean, devil deals do give us black hearts, and if our run is kinda struggling, it may be worth it to go into the first devil room, but generally it's just not worth sacrificing your angel deals for. Secondly, a lot of the very best familiars in this challenge, aka the best offensive items, also tend to be shared with the angel room item pool, so again, not really much reason to go for them. Thirdly, a lot of the absolute best devil room items that we can unlock, like Vengeful Spirit, My Shadow, or Purgatory, aren't going to be available for a very, very long time. And again, a lot of them aren't even exclusive to devil rooms. Then, lastly, and most obviously, devil deal items cost some of our life, and health is still our most important resource. I don't know if I've mentioned stats yet, but I do think I should elaborate more on it here. There are only 3 stats in the game that really benefit us in any way. Those being health, speed, and luck, with one maybe honorable mention with damage. Out of those stats, speed is pretty nice to have a boost in, but anything past 1.2 or 1.3 feels kind of redundant. And if you ever hit 1.8 or God forbid 2, it's actually kind of harmful in any segment where you want to dodge. This isn't really the case as of right now, but in any segment where you have to dodge a lot of bullets, aka a bullet hell, you don't want to be dodging around the entire arena. The best way to play bullet hells is to just really fixate on your character and make extremely small and subtle movements in order to dodge attacks. Which is much harder when pressing the D key for half a second sends you halfway across a goddamn country. So although it is extremely beneficial to get some speed, you really don't want a whole lot of it. Alternatively, luck has tons of effects that can potentially be incredibly helpful. Namely, the better room drops come to mind, as that usually equates to more pickups, which are either health outright, or are pickups that can be converted to health. Like coins being able to be spent in shops, keys being able to open shops, item rooms or chests, or bombs being able to open up secret rooms or destroy tinted rocks. But simultaneously, one of the main appeals to luck is that it massively boosts the performance of certain items. But unfortunately, most of those items are tier effects, and there are very, very few items in the game that we care about that benefit from luck. There are some good ones, Gimpy comes to mind, so does Virgo and Old Bandage, but then there's like Celtic Cross, I guess, and maybe technically Mystery Gift. There's a few other niche trinkets in effect that can also come into play, like a missing page or Isaac's Fork, but genuinely we're talking maybe 15 or so effects at most. So although luck can be a very nice stat to have, and unlike speed it actually scales extremely well, I'm just never excited to find a luck up item. And lastly, to go over an honorable mention, damage does scale insanely well with some items, and that's kind of it. It's miraculously even more niche than luck, but it does have its applications. So, again, all of this in mind, defense is king, and Angel Room items have some of the very best items on that front. And although some of the very best items are locked behind progression, and I'm just going to say this outright, we are not going to be doing Mantleless Lost runs with this rule set, a lot of them aren't, and that's a really great thing. Of course, our main problem right now is that it's pretty uncommon to see Angel Rooms, as Lilith's main strategy of repeatedly taking damage to proc Conception makes our odds of seeing them pretty unlikely. Of course, this is nullified if you have a blood bank, or a blood bag, or a sacrifice room, or even a curse room, but if you don't have those on a 4, you're either going to want to take melee damage from enemies or commit the MMORPG cardinal sin of standing in the fire. That being said, I am legitimately starting to improve with this dumbass rule set, and I've been pretty reliably getting to the mid game with even pretty bad luck. Like in this run, I almost got to Mom with my only offensive item being Cube Baby, which, don't get me wrong, was kinda funny. It was also incredibly annoying. So we should be seeing Angel deals a lot more often now. Alright, yeah, friendship ended with Devil Rooms, now Angel Rooms are my best friend. That being said, I am going to fast forward a lot here because I'm just kinda stuck in a Mom's Heart grind and there just isn't much to add. I mean, don't get me wrong, funny moments happen constantly. And I was extremely close to losing the challenge outright, because I picked up Mom's Heal without realizing it was an item that goes against our rule set. And I had an extremely close call right here against a mini-boss, but fortunately I also had 2 Spooky from way earlier in the run, which meant I was fairly confident in my ability to avoid it ever proccing. And fortunately, that confidence wasn't unfounded, as I was able to blitz to Mom's Heart and take her out without ever having it damage anything. And thank fucking God for that, because I would really, really hate it if I was forced to restart the challenge after 40 plus hours of setup and runs. But other than that, I just don't think you need to see all of my failed runs. Because as it turns out, it takes a really long time. Like, as of writing this, I played for 8 hours yesterday, and in those 8 hours, I only managed to get 4 successful Mom's Heart kills. For 5 out of 10 in total. So, yeah, I'll see you when it lives. Actually, future Davey is going to come in here real quick, so as cool as this grind was, I decided to do an extensive wiki search and found that out of all the unlocks in the game, here's a full list of every offensive item that we can look forward to unlocking before we actually unlock all the true end bosses. Robo Baby 2.0 is available if we wanted to do the Computer Savvy Challenge, which, ironically, despite being one of the easiest challenges in the game, is pretty annoying here, because this challenge doesn't have item rooms, which would mean that we would be entirely reliant on the shop giving us a good item. So, although it is technically doable at shop level 1, we don't really want to do that. Guardian Angel is available if we wanted to beat Satan as Magdalene, which is doable enough that I would consider it. She's nowhere near Lilith in terms of power level, but as of right now, she is actually our third best character, with only Azazel taking a slight lead over her. Speaking of which, Demon Baby is available if we wanted to beat the Lamb as Azazel, which would actually be a good thing to do. Then there's My Shadow, which is available if we beat Ultra Greed as Judas, which... no. Also, Immaculate Conception is available by beating Boss Rush as Lilith, but for reasons I'm going to get into very soon, that shit ain't happening. Oh, what was that? You expected more? You think this is incomplete? Nope. That is literally it. Of course we're talking about offensive familiars here. Like, there are a fair few trinkets, active items, and defensive items we could potentially get, sure, but we already have some pretty solid options on that front, so I'm not necessarily in a rush to blitz through them. And you know what, if the total amount of unlocks we could pursue was like 15, 20, 25, I wouldn't consider this an issue. The run would be extremely monotonous and boring, sure, but I could get over it. But it just isn't. As fucked up as it sounds, we've pretty much done every build in the game already. And especially from a viewer's perspective, I don't think you're going to be wowed when I finally bust out the exact same build for the 20th run in a row, but this one has Tiny Toma. And then you're going to start sharing this video on every social media platform when the next run starts and it's the exact same build again, but I have a Locust of Pestilence as my trinket. Truly mind-blowing stuff here. So we pretty much have two options here. Either repeat this over and over and over again until we hit our next major milestone, which I'm going to add is not only extremely far away, but would also be incredibly boring for the both of us. Or we change the rules a little bit in order to spice things up. Personally, for the sake of both you and me, I'm going to advocate for the latter, because after It Lives is yet another grind as we need to unlock the Polaroid to kill Blue Baby, and to get to Mega Satan, and be able to get to Dogma in the Beast. So after doing 10 consecutive runs of Mom's Heart, to get the Polaroid we need to kill Isaac 5 times, and likewise, we need to also kill Hush 3 times in order to unlock the alternative path. And although after your second Hush kill you can ascend up to the Cathedral to kill Isaac, that's still a minimum of 13 filler runs that would play out virtually the exact same way. So, yeah, we're gonna change up the rules a little bit. But for shits and giggles, I completed a playthrough of every end boss with the current rule set, just to show you that it is doable, and I'm making this decision purely to make the content more interesting and not as a cop-out. Because don't get me wrong, 20 hours of Mom's Heart changes a man, but compared to other things I've done on this channel, it doesn't rank especially high on the worst things I've ever done. For example, my Pokemon Black playthrough where I didn't use any moves, which required me to get a Lillipup up to level 16 so it could evolve into Herdier and get the Intimidate ability, while simultaneously grinding out pickups. And the only way I could gain experience was making level 2 Wild Purloin struggle themselves to death. In my mind, that is still one of the worst things I've ever had to do for this channel, and I would rather do the Mom's Heart grind 3 times than do that again. I mean, hell, you can even tell that this had direct, long-lasting consequences on my mental health, as there was once a period in my life where my voice had life and hope in it, and now it's just dead. we need to grind out the wild Pokemon by making them kill themselves with struggle. Every single battle. This means every Pokemon can take anywhere from 80 to nearly 200 turns each. I'm going to go ahead and pull a Harambe and say that this right here was my canon event, which led me going down extremely dark paths. What were we even talking about again? Oh yeah, rules. Alright, let's open up 2 new addendums for this playthrough. Firstly, we're going to open up the amount of items that Isaac can take to include any items that damage via contact, on the condition that it cannot be an item that makes us immune to damage or specifically curated to be used offensively. So for example, Ares or Mars. Yeah, I don't really think charging headfirst into your enemies with a force of 1,000 suns would be considered pacifistic. Wearing heals that poke your enemies for a measly amount of damage if they are in melee range and hence attacking you? Yeah, I feel like that's perfectly acceptable. I'm also opening up the list of items that are inanimate that Isaac can take, but I'm still going to exclude weapons. I'm not going to start stabbing everything to death with Mom's Knife, Spear of Destiny, or Sacrificial Dagger and claim that it's self-defense. But something like Finger or even Holy Water? Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. Secondly, remember that controller technique I mentioned way earlier? So, there's a blindfold item that you can find in specific challenges which would more or less replicate that for us. I mean, shit, there's the Family Man challenge, which would more or less be our current rule set, but funnily enough, its reward is one of the very best items in the game. Which, of course, means that it is almost entirely worthless for us. Funny how that one works. Anyway, the point I'm getting at here is that I'm going to be adding in the blindfold item to more or less replicate that effect in a far more interesting and elegant way. Because, don't get me wrong, I could just use an external program that limits how far my controller inputs would be registered, but not only is the blindfold much more flavorful, but it's a solution that actually does come with downsides. For example, there are plenty of situations where we would want to use our tears against obstacles, which just isn't possible with the blindfold. There's also plenty of interactions with tears that are immensely beneficial for us that we just wouldn't be able to use. Something like Sulfuric Tears, Terra, or even the previously mentioned Epic or Dr. Fetus. I was leading you on when I said that Epic Fetus was almost entirely worthless because sure, I can't use it offensively, but as I'm sure you were thinking to yourself when I said that, it also comes with a fantastic effect of more or less replacing bombs as a resource. Stone chests? Those are always open for us. Tinted rocks? Always able to be destroyed. Secret rooms? As long as we're willing to go around the entire map and bomb every location it can be, they're also always available for us. Over the course of an entire run, that adds up. Those items I mentioned will never carry a run on their own, but the sheer value they can provide is genuinely comparable to something like Book of Revelations or Satanic Bible, 2 of our very best items. That is completely thrown out of the window though, if we can't cry. And this isn't just one niche effect that I'm highlighting here to justify this decision. There are plenty of other effects and interactions that Blindfold just completely ruins. So there's trade-off here. So to get into why I'm doing this, of course the purpose of adding this in is so we could utilize arrow key familiars without relying on getting a charge attack, a la Brimstone, Monstrous Lung, Chocolate Milk, etc. That being said though, we aren't completely opening up the familiar floodgate. For example, we're sure as fuck not allowing Incubus and hence just abusing Lilith even further by proxy. And there are some other familiars that I think just completely ruin the pacifism rule set if we were to include them. But things like Brother Bobby, Lil Brimstone, Seraphim, Rotten Baby, and all of these other familiars, for example, they're finally usable now, and that's going to add in a lot more variety to our runs, how we approach them, and so on and so forth. Also, in case it needs to be said outright, our other rules still apply. Just because I'm slightly opening up our available options doesn't mean we're gonna start going down the rabbit hole of, well, actually, it isn't Isaac doing the damage here, it's Mega Blast. Mega Satan's possessing him, don't you see? What are you, an idiot? Everything else still applies. We're just getting that disclaimer out of the way. TLDW, more goons, and getting beaten to death is no longer a crime. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get some unlocks with other characters and put Lilith to rest. First and foremost, Blue Baby. Predictably, in a challenge where most items are either completely useless or even mostly useless, unlocking the D6 for Isaac is going to make him an incredibly fun and effective character to play. Will he become the best character at our disposal? I think Lilith is still better even before the limitations were freed up, and Magdalene and Azazel have only gotten even better. But I do think Isaac will be one of our very best characters for us that will help break up the monotony and make runs even more consistent. On the opposite of incredible characters though, Blue Baby. Yeah, in order to get the D6 for Isaac, we kinda have to get him through the finish line first, don't we? Let me tell you, even with the limitations we just freed up, Blue Baby was a goddamn struggle. The complete inability to gain any red hearts whatsoever means that our defensive options are substantially rarer, and the ability to play with our health in any meaningful way was almost entirely invalidated. Blood banks are now effectively entirely worthless, and utilizing shops is much more difficult because of that. Sacrifice rooms are much more difficult to get any value out of. Cursed rooms are similarly much less valuable overall and are typically worth avoiding now. And I could go on and on. What this means for me is, well, firstly, skill issue on my part, just don't get hit 5-head, but secondly, if our run didn't have the ability to consistently generate soul hearts, things were pretty dire. Like, our first real run, we had a decent chunk of soul hearts early on. And offensively, the run wasn't slouching either, with Mongo Baby, Big Chub, Ghost Baby, Brother Bobby, and Giant Cell. Altogether, that's a pretty decent roster of goons. That being said though, pretty decent wasn't even close to enough. Theoretically, the damage could be pretty decent, but lining up 3 familiars to attack the same target was more or less impossible. And that issue is only further exemplified with bosses that move around the arena and or become immune for a short duration, and especially so with bosses who do that, all the while spawning in waves of ads that we want to kill ASAP. Yeah, come Necropolis, our run was really starting to bleed out, and defeat followed it very quickly. The run after that actually led off with some decent firepower with Lil Brimstone and Lil Monstro. But again, we were really bleeding out, and the floor's boss room being Double Trouble Gertie Jr. just finished off whatever hope we may have had of finishing this run. About an hour later, we had a run with Rotten Baby. Okay, technically we had Hive Mind 2, so it's kind of like 2 Rotten Babies, and we even managed to unlock Spider Baby, which even after years of playing this game, I'm still not fully aware of what it does. But genuinely, that was all this run had. Do you know what managed to push this run over the edge, though? The Bible. Yeah, honestly, if we had to fight Mom or Mom's Heart, this run would probably just be dead. Also, I don't care what anyone says, this has never counted as an offensive item. It's only useful in an entire 2 fights, and those 2 fights just so happen to be your zealous mother who gets bonked by the Bible regardless of how you defeat her. In fact, saying that is slightly disingenuous because you don't even whack her with it. You just hold it over your head and she's just, damn, don't have a retort against that one. and just dies from cringe. Which is totally lore accurate, by the way. As somebody who lives deep in the Bible Belt, the #1 counter to zealous Christians, ironically just so happens to be the Bible. Actually, totally related personal anecdote, but when I went to the capital of the state in 6th grade, our school trip was very promptly brigaded by the fucking Westboro Baptist Church. And it was like this borderline satirical South Park episode where you just had a bunch of 6th graders trying to eat their fucking PB&Js while a bunch of grown adults hold God hates fags and you're going to hell signs. I don't remember there being any fucking verse in the Bible where eating a PB&J is a sin against Christ, but I guess I done goofed. No fucking repentance for me. I'm going to hell. Bye bye. I don't know, fucking Kansas, dude. Anyways, back towards the run, there also deserves to be a special shout out to Mitra 2, as that's one of the very best defensive items that we could have possibly gotten for Blue Baby. But genuinely it was the Bible that led to this run crossing the finish line. And I do fully mean that, because holy shit, I was 2 hits away from dying on Isaac. Genuinely my blood pressure was through the roof, but now that we have our goon, our first run with Isaac was easily our biggest landslide victory in this entire video. And I do want to clarify, by first run, I don't mean pressing the R key until I got a good starting item. I mean I literally booted up the game, chose Isaac, went to the item room, began to restart before going, oh yeah, I have the D6 LOL, and got what is probably our single best familiar in the entire game. I mean, Rotten Baby tends to scale a bit better, but genuinely they're both on the same magnitude of badassery. Any day where we're given either of these goons is going to be a very good day for us. Our luck didn't stop there though. This only got better with our offensive toolkit progressing with Bloodshot Eye, Buddy in a Box, Big Chubby, Sissy Longlegs, Lil Brimstone, 7 Seals, and Ghost Baby. And our health was quite possibly, for the first time in this entire challenge, consistently being topped off. And we also had Cancer, which more or less doubled it come late game. This was our first run in the entire challenge where I felt genuinely confident in my ability to kill Hush. Of course, saying that, I totally forgot about the 30-minute time limit and spent way too much time gambling, but I think the setup would have gotten it done. In fact, let me load up another save real quick and add in some items via console commands and real quick verify that this isn't a baseless claim. Okay, yeah, that was extremely rough on my end, but the fact that I still managed to get a landslide victory over Hush after playing that badly really just proves the point that I was trying to get at. So, obviously with that being said, yeah, Isaac didn't stand a fucking chance. And we're another run closer to unlocking the chest. Yeah, we're still on that grind, granted only 2 more runs in total, but I'm genuinely not too pressed about it because unlocking the chest will make fighting Mega Stan 100 times easier, and it may even end up being a pit stop for Delirium if we get a portal to spawn. A portal. Hey Tony, this is anti-Italian discrimination. I don't fucking know anymore. Now, this is about the time I get to what is easily the least fun part about this entire playthrough. Hush. Now, before you say anything, I fucking adore the Hush fight. In my standard playthroughs, even if I'm in a catastrophically dire run, if I beat It Lives and that damn boss door opens, I'm going down there to try and kick his ass. It doesn't matter if I already have his completion mark, it doesn't matter if I already have his completion mark and Delirium's, and it doesn't matter if I will inevitably fail because I jumped down there with 2.5 soul hearts and a subpar damage item. I will jump down there, and I will kill him or die trying. That being said, do you know what goes well with a challenge about pacifism? A strict, binary, pass or fail timer that starts counting down from the second you start a run. In most other circumstances, the 30-minute timer isn't traditionally strict. It's something to keep in mind, I guess. You probably don't want to bust out some sick placenta or nod leaf strats, but assuming your run is even on an okay pace, you really should almost always have it lives down in half an hour. That being said, for pacifism, yeah, that timer can be extremely demanding, and it just led to an inevitable playstyle that I really wanted to avoid for our main runs. Before I get into explaining that though, for a bit of preamble, I just want to really quickly highlight our previous notable runs and their starting items. For our first 5 Mom's Heart kills, our starting items were Friend Zone, Forever Alone, Boiled Baby, Sci-Fly, and again, Forever Alone. None of these are particularly fantastic starts. I mean, Sci-Fly is traditionally an extremely powerful item, and it does scale into the late game well for us, but nobody recognizes Sci-Fly as an offensive powerhouse. Going back to Hush though, we just don't really get the luxury of trying fun or off-meta starts. Because pretty much every familiar runs into one of 2 major problems. Their damage profile is too skewed into AoE or single target, and or their damage isn't consistent against specific enemies. For example, Daddy Longlegs, not a viable start, takes too long between attacks. Attack Flies, also not viable starts. Any enemy that teleports or leaps takes too long to kill. Leech, the previously titled best item for us, even he begins to struggle because all it takes is one fly flying over a rock or one spider climbing over a gap, and your run is completely over. Can't do anything about it. All of this in mind, there are only really 3 viable starts available that can realistically set you up for success. Lil Brimstone, Rotten Baby, and Seraphim. And note that I'm specifically saying that they'll set you up for success. They're extremely viable starts, but on their own, they're just not enough to get there in time. So you really need to hope and pray that you find some other supplemental damage to throw in alongside them. One day I played and recorded my attempts to kill Hush for 8 hours straight. And in that time, if I'm being generous, about 2 out of 8 of those hours were spent on viable runs. And out of all those runs, only 3 of them were good enough in my mind to warrant continuing past the caves. Our first attempt did actually manage to get to Hush, but I unfortunately perished because I was really tunnel visioning and didn't see an incoming attack. All in all, it was totally a deserved loss. Don't get me wrong, it did sting in the moment because we were pretty close to killing him, but you can't achieve happiness in life without some failure, so back to the basement we go. The second attempt, though, was so comically rigged that I almost feel like it was an intentional slight. Just an endless legion of Mom's hands, hosts, dips, and whatever the fuck this is even. Miraculously though, even despite that, I was still on pace to get to Hush. So of course the map layouts trolled me, and the boss room was pretty much always the last room on the floor that I would find. In fact, let's go ahead and get rid of pretty much. It was always the last room on the floor. I verified this. So of course with that in mind, I got to It Lives in 31 minutes, and overall it just felt awful. The tilt was definitely starting to get to me. That being said though, I did persist, and the third run did actually succeed in killing Hush. Problem, we need to kill Hush 3 times. And in at least one of those runs, we also need to port up to Isaac and kick his ass one last time. Yeah, this genuinely just took all of the fun and wacky things you could do with this challenge and just transformed it into an unfun check where the only way to win was to spam restarts until we got 1 of 3 specific items and an incredible run to follow it. It was tiring, it's boring, I don't think there's anything to really add to it, so just like Mom's Heart, I'm not going to bother discussing it. Actually, there is one kinda small thing to add here. I killed Delirium, but you know what? I'm not counting it, because I sincerely didn't feel like I achieved a victory here. The title screen says I did, the bestiary says I did, and I even got the unlocks for it, which are obviously extremely good, but this run was just so stat-checky that it was impossible to really lose. Do you know that infamous Sekiro copy pasta? I genuinely just felt that. I hardly even moved during Hush's fight because nothing was on the line. It was impossible for me to lose as long as I held down the arrow keys in the general direction of Hush's hitbox and occasionally moved. Delirium also wasn't any better, as it was guaranteed to die as long as I held down the arrow keys and walked around the room in a square repeatedly. I sincerely just felt like a member of those roaming squadrons of middle-aged women who go to the gym to do nothing but walk around the perimeter of the building instead of going on the dozen or so cardio machines like a functioning member of society. The point I'm getting at here is that it was a hollow victory that only felt like one by technicality, and I would like to revisit this challenge in a run that wasn't the embodiment of, "Did you know that if you have a near-perfect run, the game is really easy?" Like, thank you. I understand that. Trust me, as a YouTube creator, this is actually on the higher echelon of useful feedback. Just because it's true doesn't mean that it isn't an incredibly boring statement, though. Whatever, I digress. We do have the alt path unlocked now, which means that this challenge is back towards a very interesting phase. So for our first run, we're not going to go to the alt path because we need to get another Isaac kill under our belt for the Polaroid and the chest. But we're going to take this as an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and unlock our girl Bethany, which requires us to beat It Lives as Lazarus without losing a life, which is definitely doable and the reward is well worth it. Minor spoiler on that front, but we're not going to be using Isaac or Lilith for the rest of the video, so we get to look forward to a much more diverse roster of characters looking forward. Anyway, despite what I just said about the challenge, our Lazarus run was miraculously even more boring than the Isaac run because, although the start of the run was really fun, I eventually just ran into the Exodia pieces of Placenta Gimpy IV bag, which when assembled means that, as long as I'm willing to wait, I can enter any room with full health. So of course, since I just wanted to get to the next part of a challenge and not go through R-key hell, I ended up doing just that. I did a quick elliptical run, took a shower, played with Bug, did some journaling, got some food. Really anything that wasn't playing the game until I just face-tanked everything in one. But you know what? We got Bethany, we got the chest, we got the alt path, and I had a massive part of the script here elaborating on how cool I thought Bethany was, and how terrified I was of the alt path because very realistically this should have been a massive roadblock. Not quite R-key until we got a God Start roadblock a la Hush, especially with Bethany as I'm going to get into in just a second, but something that would take a lot of attempts and active consideration into conquering. But as you may have guessed by my choice of words, during one of my first attempts I got an absolutely insane combo. So the thing about Bethany is that she starts with this really cool book that spawns orbiting familiars that can acquire different attributes depending on the active item that she's holding. The reason I really wanted to get her for alt path is that she currently has the entirely unique quality of being a base character that can deal damage right out of the gate without relying on picking up an item. So because of that, her early game is much more stable, and this legitimately multiplies the amount of viable items that we can find. Don't get me wrong, there are still plenty of worthless items, sure, but now I'm able to just start a run and let things play out. No need to R-key until we find a rotten baby, or even just a usable familiar, period. Just start up a run and see what you can find. Is it still technically optimal to just R-spam? I mean, sure, maybe, but up to this point in the challenge, I've probably spent 15 to 20 or so cumulative hours just holding down R so I could gain the ability to play the damn game. As goddamn tragic as this is to say, just the ability to start a run and actually proceed past the first room without RNG is a surprisingly great feeling. Yeah, I transformed Isaac into one of those terrible mobile games with an energy system. It's a sad time for us all. And by us all, I actually just mean me. I just figured I'd include you so there's some parasocial connection here. Like when you're a kid and Mother's Day rolls around and your dad gives her a gift and says it's from you and Dad. You weren't fucking involved. You didn't get any goddamn money. You don't work in a factory. It was your dad. Your dad did everything. But you know what? Your mom knows it, she's in on the bit, and she's going to allow you to feel some joy. Happy times all around. Anyways, another great quality that Bethany has is the sheer amount of variety of wisps that you can generate. As I've already mentioned, the wisps that Book of Revelations can generate gain different properties depending on what active item you're holding. And historically, active items have been pretty hit or miss, with most of them being entirely useless. The Book of Revelations mixes things up for us substantially and transforms previously worthless items or starts into absolute powerhouses. I'll say it again, the amount of viable items that we can find have increased exponentially. And I think that's pretty neat. Also, the last notable quality to highlight real quick is that she always starts off with an angel room instead of a devil room. So our angel room high roll potential opens up much sooner and is generally much safer. So with all that said, I was going through some runs. None of them were successful attempts, mind you, but I was genuinely just having a lot of fun with different combos and items I never got to use before. And after so many hours of the same few floors with only minor variations, the variety found in the alt path was incredibly fun. It was a lot harder, and the bonus Curse of the Blind item is entirely worthless for us since it can genuinely just force us to reset our run, but I didn't care. It was pretty hard, but overall, I was enjoying myself. Can't wait for somebody to take that out of context. That being said, everything changed when I started a run and picked up the Book of Revelations. The Book of Revelations Wisp effect is actually kind of underwhelming at first glance. Using it creates a very close range wisp that doesn't fire tears, but does deal contact damage and block projectiles. However, once the wisp takes enough damage, it will create a Harbinger familiar for the rest of the room. The same exact ones that spawn from Seven Seals, which has historically been an incredible item for us. That being said, it is only for one room, and it is kinda risky to proc, so it's not great, but it's also not bad either. That being said, along the way, I picked up a car battery which makes active items activate twice. Obviously, for a character that is extremely reliant on their active item, that is extremely good. But what's really important to note here is that Bethany can't pick up or generate soul hearts. Instead, she converts them into a battery-esque resource for her Book of Virtues, including the soul hearts generated by Book of Revelations. So effectively, the price of creating a wisp was reduced to only 1, which when compared to the traditional 4 to 6 is absolutely insane value. But what makes it even better is that if I use the item with its normal charges, it'll generate 4 soul charges regardless. Which led to some pretty fucking crazy stockpiling. I decided to play extremely frugally until I saved up an absolutely absurd amount of soul charges that I couldn't even hope to spend. And along the way I even managed to pick up some decent health items and a holy mantle. Which, when you consider that I'm effectively immune to projectiles and that melee enemies can't approach me without taking massive damage, outside of boss rooms, we were effectively immortal. Like, don't get me wrong, there were still some scary moments during this run. Early on, if the room layout for the mirror section was terrible, we were always on the precipice of death due to transforming into a character that couldn't be hit because we haven't unlocked the mantle for the Lost. And that's kinda scary. And this section for the knife piece never fails to accelerate my heart rate to 1,000,000,000, even if I know it's realistically pretty easy. But by the time we reached the mausoleum and the corpse, the only weakness this run had was survivability against bosses, as I only had 5 hearts. Don't get me wrong, our run is absolutely insane, but our damage is still far from exceptional, and we pretty much have to enter melee range in order to generate our horsemen, which can be pretty scary, especially against bosses that ignore our projectile deflecting capabilities. Which just so happens to be most mausoleum and corpse bosses. This was no longer an issue when I got to Corpse 2, entered a curse room, opened a red chest, got teleported to an angel room, decided to take a very bold dare on picking up a Curse of the Blind angel room item, which, let me remind you, can end our run, hence why I didn't pick up the planetarium item from earlier. And the angel room item just so happened to very conveniently be a prayer card, which when combined with car battery, meant I could get as many hearts as I wanted. What the fuck? Yeah, after that incredibly normal occurrence, I decided it was about time we visited Mother. And even after spending a ton of soul charges on hearts, we still had so many left over that we were practically an infinite horseman machine. In a normal playthrough, I would consider this an absolutely insane run. For a goddamn pacifism challenge? I mean, if you want to be pedantic, our only damage option outside of the wisps and horsemen were boiled baby and seraphim, so there was technically room for improvement. Realistically though, I can't help but think that this is just gonna be a peak that can't be topped. Even in that delirium fight with Isaac, it was a fantastic run, and one that is essentially as good as we can hope for a run to be. I was in a fucking invincible Mongolian warlord though. And the part that makes this even better? This was a god run I managed to achieve after only 30 minutes of failed attempts. Realistically, the Mother fight could have been another 15 or 20 hour long wall, but I managed to completely luck out and completely demolish it. And that feels fucking incredible. So it's with a heavy heart that I have to admit that this absolute display of tyranny is unfortunately the last we're going to be seeing of Bethany, as we're on to the next step of the challenge, which isn't one that is hard like Mother or extremely strict like Hush. It's just fucking annoying. With the alt path conquered and Jacob and Esau unlocked, we're perfectly set up to get our very first Tainted character. Fortunately, we don't have to fight Dogma or the Beast in order to unlock Tainted characters, but we do have to play as Jacob and Esau, which is just an absolute tragedy in of itself. Firstly, my blindfold item won't fucking work, so I guess arrow key familiars are a no-go unless we find a charge-up item for Esau, but that's pretty rare, and picking up Brimstone to use something like Brother Bobby is borderline satirical. Which makes the fact that I actually did have a run where Esau had Ipecac and Brimstone all the more depressing. Really, the fact that it actually happened and isn't just a hypothetical niche case scenario I made up is just incredibly telling of how dire things are for us. And miraculously, the fact that that run actually failed near the very end, after several hours of failed attempts, is even more damning. What am I doing here? Secondly, and debatably even more troubling, is that this is a challenge that has historically struggled with health. The biggest difference between our greatest runs and the runs that failed just before the precipice of glory was whether or not that run had a steady stockpile of health and or a fantastic defensive item in their arsenal. So, when you literally multiply the most prevalent issue in this challenge by 2, things are a little bit more difficult. In fact, it's not even unfair to say that it's significantly worse than multiplying by 2, because at least in most runs I can consistently dodge. Sometimes. Occasionally. But with J&D, dodging a projectile goes from a simple exercise in pressing the S or maybe even the S and D key for half a nanosecond to having to compute like 17,000 different timelines within the span of half a second, like Doctor Strange because Esau got clipped on a rock and now it's virtually impossible to dodge an incoming attack on both characters. I don't like Jacob and Esau. And this is coming from a guy who actually adores the least popular and most hated characters. I'm not going to display it right now because it becomes more relevant later, but my list of favorite characters will probably give you an aneurysm. Ever since the Lost's $100 stake back in Rebirth, I've just always had a soft spot for the outcasts. He got a bunch of balance changes over the years and now he's actually insanely good in my opinion, but the Lost has been in my car for years. He's my one passenger wherever I go. I love my stupid little ghost friend. Jacob and Esau, though, I just don't like them. Get them out of here, please. I don't want to see their stupid fucking faces ever again. Whatever, we're in this together. We actually aren't. It's just me again. We've already been over this. I'm just saying it to myself so I can gain the motivation to get past this goddamn character.
2,000 years later.
Alright, I'm back. I did it. I need to take this as an opportunity to give a hyper-specialized fuck you to Blighted Ovum. This usually isn't a hard boss in the slightest. You just deploy the same middle-aged woman tech I discussed during Delirium's fight, and walk around in a square and fire at him chasing you ad infinitum. However, this does not work in pacifism, since you need to keep him back by firing tears at him and knocking him back slightly. And as you may recall, we don't have access to arrow key familiars anymore, so we can't even use them. And I swear to God, every time I got a semi-decent start, thinking that I could potentially launch off of it, Blighted Ovum. Spend 30 minutes trying to get a good run, finally got an attack fly, Blighted Ovum. Restart. Get another good run after an hour, Blighted Ovum. Good fucking try, restart. Quit playing the game for 3 days because you decided to spend your time not torturing yourself and play a fun game that makes you happy instead. Even there they have a decisive victory over me. I may have gotten my cool girl golden dice, but no matter how accomplished I may feel during the moment, I will have to return to Isaac. And they will be waiting. Biding their time. Waiting for the opportune time to strike. Dread it. Run from it. Blighted Ovum arrives all the same. And they will force me to restart my run. I will become back my money. Whatever, back to what I was saying. After what seemed like an eternity of struggling and failed runs, I finally had one where I picked up a bunch of great defensive items, a la Wafer, Luna, Prayer Card, and many others, which when combined with our all-reliable Daddy Longlegs, meant that we finally made it to home, which means that we could unlock our boy, Tainted Jacob. Also, if you're curious about how the Dogma fight went, I wanted to attempt the fight, even if I knew I would realistically never kill the beast with exclusively Daddy Longlegs. But I done goofed and picked up a mom item, completely forgetting the fact that Esau already had 2 mom items, which of course meant that he got the mom transformation, which magically summons a knife from thin air, so that completely nullifies that prospect. Whoops. Anyways, something I like to do for my content is make it understandable even by people who aren't knowledgeable in the games that I'm covering. And I think I do a good job at that, seeing by how many comments I get, like, I don't play X, but I've seen all of your videos on it, or I managed to follow along despite never playing X, but... That being said, the literal opening paragraph of this video is describing how weird this game is, so I just don't know how successful I am here. So, for those of you who are somehow up to this point who don't play The Binding of Isaac and are undoubtedly extremely lost, Tainted characters can be described as alternative versions of the base characters where their identity is taken to an extreme. For example, Eve has a much higher emphasis on harming herself for damage, Magdalene has to play around her health much more deliberately, Samson used to be mad but is now absolutely fucking pissed. You get the idea. With that in mind, Tainted Jacob. Now, I've said a lot of bad things in this video, and things I'm sure that the Isaac community would generally disagree with, and I've probably made decisions that would trigger even the most casual Isaac fan. But that being said, what I'm about to say might genuinely be the most controversial statement in this entire video. I think this is the third video I've made where I've tried covering something that got rudely interrupted by a train. I think it's gone now. Anyways, Tainted Jacob is easily my favorite character. In fact, he's pretty much the main reason I started this video in the first place. Look, there's a common denominator in my three favorite characters, which is the existence of the adrenaline state. Typically characters that sacrifice survivability for sheer firepower. The Lost and Tainted Keeper are the two most recognizable examples of that, as they both effectively have 2 HP. Don't get me wrong, there's some ways to increase it, or to generally just increase survivability as a whole. Most of the time though, you're kinda just rolling with 2 HP. This frequently leads to moments where you get hit and you just know you are 1 hit away from death, and I fucking love that. It never fails to get me pumped. And like I said, these characters are usually much stronger overall due to their frail nature, which makes the highs all the more exhilarating. Tainted Jacob doesn't usually reach the same highs as these two characters, but he has one thing up his sleeve that makes him exceedingly powerful. If you're curious as to why it's Tainted Jacob and not Tainted Jacob and Tainted Esau, that's because Esau fucking died and is making it his undead life's goal to absolutely murder Jacob. A hit reference to the pop culture phenomenon, the Bible. What this means in-game is that once you start a level, he will suddenly appear from the fiery depths of hell and chase you. If at any moment he touches you, you'll be transformed into a spectral form which cannot take damage. If you get hit in this form, you will die. Simple as that. That being said, there are intricacies to this, as this isn't a permanent transformation as you get back all of your health on the next floor, which means that there are scenarios where getting hit intentionally is good. For example, if you need to pick up an item that's blocked, you can just beat the floor, intentionally take damage, go back to that room, and utilize your newfound flight to obtain it. Including hearts, as you can still pick them up even if you're a ghost, which is a surprisingly useful feature. And despite what you may think after saying that, you can also utilize this form to get a free devil deal just like the Lost, and although historically angel deals have been better for us, getting devil room items for free entirely mitigates its biggest weakness, and because of that, devil rooms are actually incredibly viable for this character. That being said, if that was all this character did, they'd be pretty viable, but we probably wouldn't use them. Of course, this brings us to this character's main upside. Despite chasing you, Esau does an imperial fuck ton of collateral damage to every enemy he comes in contact with. which we're obviously going to be utilizing to our advantage. Also note that I'm saying collateral damage because Esau is an enemy. You will find this dude in the bestiary. He's just chilling out right next to fucking Delirium. He'll even gain stats just like every other enemy. Like, as of writing this, I've encountered him 135 times, have died to him 4 times, and haven't managed to kill him ever because he's fucking invincible. This dude is not your enemy, he is the enemy. And I think that's really kick-ass. Anyway, you do also have some control over Esau as you start off with the Anima Sola item, which you can use to temporarily chain him, which prevents him from moving, and hence you become immune to his attacks. But upon expiring after a few seconds or using the Anima Sola again, Esau will be released and he'll suddenly charge towards the location you were at when the effect expired. This is obviously incredibly helpful if you feel like you're about to get hit, but with proper kiting and item usage, Esau can absolutely demolish early floors, and just like Bethany, it's a really great feeling to be able to just play the game without a barrier to entry. However, unlike Bethany's pretty lackluster base Lisp damage, Tainted Jacob does insanely well in the early game with 0 complications, scales into the mid-game decently well, and actually becomes stronger late-game, as some of Esau's attacks completely ignores armor. If you don't know what boss armor is, it's a system added with Afterbirth to make a few specific encounters much more challenging. It's a system you can really feel come Repentant, since the enemies found nowadays are significantly stronger than enemies you would typically find in Rebirth, and with Rebirth having much stronger items overall while having a much denser item pool, the qualifications for a great run were surprisingly low. Like, if you found Brimstone, Mom's Knife, or Epic Fetus, you pretty much just won outright, as those would just obliterate anything that dares stand in your warpath with little resistance. And I know that you're probably thinking that's still the case to an extent, but not only have some of the best items in the game been nerfed by upwards of 60 to 70%, but now the game is much more focused on collecting and utilizing powerful item synergies rather than specific individual items, so your average run has slightly decreased in power over the years, while the ceiling was raised exponentially. Which I will clarify here, I believe is the best direction to take the game. I'm just setting the foundation here. So with that in mind, they introduced boss armor so that the highest of high-end runs are still obscenely powerful, but the difference between a good run and a god run isn't quite as massive, and player skill is rewarded more. Not that Isaac is a strictly competitive game with an elite esports community, but some level of balance is definitely needed so that the game isn't strictly luck-based with items and synergies. Even for the roguelike genre, a genre that is practically defined by randomness, I find that Isaac tends to have much more variables compared to other games in the genre, so the system helps incentivize playstyles where you need to leverage what you're given in order to make the best of it, all the while making bosses much more approachable. And currently I think that's balanced incredibly well. So with that in mind, as you've probably guessed, armor is a variable that reduces damage dealt to a target depending on the amount of incoming damage and how it's distributed. There isn't really a hard cap, as at most armor can only reduce damage taken by 91%, so it's not like god runs are completely hampered. But there are certain thresholds in which diminishing returns start to take root, and because of that, there is a quote-unquote soft cap on how much DPS you can deal, depending on the target's armor. For example, to take Hush, he has an incredibly subtle 6,666 health, with his armor giving him an effective soft DPS cap of 48, which will usually lead to Hush being anywhere between a 1.5 to 3 minute fight. But with Esau's charge attack entirely ignoring armor, Whenever he does that swipe, it will pretty much always deal roughly 5 to 7% of the boss's health bar, which is kind of insane. Admittedly, it may not sound like it when I phrase it like that, but you have to consider that this isn't the only way he does damage. His contact damage in particular can add up to insane effect. Especially when you consider that end bosses are typically pretty large and hence have a hitbox that Esau can collide with much easier, and that he's almost always going to be colliding straight into them after a charge attack since he has to get back to you, which is likely in the way of the boss. Yeah, that damage will ramp up to pretty crazy effect. But even ignoring end bosses for a second here, the damage is still absolutely insane. In fact, it's even more insane because, don't get me wrong, I'm really highlighting the armor negation perk a lot here since it's a very notable highlight and one that ultimately makes Dark Esau a boss killer. But the reason I'm highlighting it is because its base damage is so high. The fact that it's unmitigated damage wouldn't matter if the damage was low, but it isn't at all. Like, 5% of quadruple or quintuple digit health bars is still like 100% of most enemies, and depending on where you're at in the game, anywhere between 80 to 20% of a boss's health pool. Yeah, overall, we're pretty happy campers. I mean, kinda scared campers too, don't get me wrong, we can always lose a run almost instantly, but still, happy campers. I love Tainted Jacob, and obviously for this challenge, he is going to be legendary. Also, to kinda go back to that point, this is totally unrelated to the video, but I think the reason he's my favorite character is because of his biblical references. I know they're to be expected from this game. It's literally impossible to boot up the game without seeing a glaringly obvious one. But with so many items and so many characters, I find that the references and their implementations in-game can be lost in translation. I don't really want to elaborate on a bunch of specifics because we gotta get back to the goddamn challenge at some point. And the really cool thing about religion is that you can have 100 people read the same book or same paragraphs and get wildly different interpretations of the text. For better and for worse. But the point I'm getting at here is that I think that the implementation of the character to the game is fucking perfect. One of the reasons that Edmund McMillen was so keen on working with the Anti-Birth team was that they got the theming of really everything perfectly. And I totally agree, it's so fucking good. Anyways, gushing aside, we kinda have a problem. Pretty big one, actually. We're trying to use Tainted Jacob against Mega Satan, and let me tell you, normally, it's kinda fine. In this context, it's not gonna work. Navigating a bullet hell all the while micromanaging Esau is kinda hard, but at least with all of the other end bosses you have a very large arena to work with. Mega Satan's, in comparison, is just so much more claustrophobic. Oh my fucking god, I forgot about the mod. Yeah, as I'm sure you've noticed already, I've been playing with workshop mods, all purely visual or quality of life changes. Nothing that really provides an in-game advantage, but yeah, here is Mega Satan, but It's My Dad, the sequel. I mean, honestly, after playing it, I'm confused as to why Edmund McMillen would ever pick up the Anti-Birth team when he could just hire this guy's fucking dad. You know what, though? We've all made mistakes in our professional or unprofessional careers, so we're gonna let it slide. Anyways, Megadad's arena is extremely claustrophobic, with width being a massive issue in particular. But that's not where the problems end. Another massive issue is the fact that aligning Esau against him is extremely difficult, with very scripted attack patterns. Without the help of external items, you're supposed to dodge most of Megadad's attacks in a very predetermined way with little room for on-the-fly improv. That, when combined with Esau, would be terrible on its own, but more importantly is that there are so many ads. There's gluttony, there's envy, there's sloth, pride, wrath, greed, lust, valhalla, famine, pestilence, war, death, super envy, super lust, super wrath, super sloth, super gluttony, super pride, super greed, fallen Uriel, and fallen Gabriel. All the horsemen, super sins, and fallen angels are guaranteed to spawn in a fight with all of the lesser sins and, for some reason, the hollow spawning occasionally. Some of these are okay to deal with. Some of them are absolutely not. And keep in mind, when you're killing ads in the ad phase, Mega Satan heals. Yeah, that's always fun. Look, I tried. I genuinely did. I even had glowing hourglass, so I had 4 tries on one particularly good run. But I failed. This is just not Tainted Jacob's time to shine. So we're running it back to Isaac. Tainted Isaac, that is. I'm sure some keen-eyed viewers noticed, but I didn't mention during Jacob and Esau's horrific adventure that I totally forgot that red key is a guaranteed spawn the first time you enter home, so I wanted to unlock the ability to convert trinkets to red key fragments with an easier character, not knowing that that step was entirely redundant for us. Whoops. I mean, at least it works out in our favor here, though. Oh yeah, actually, I get to take this as an opportunity to mention that extremely niche bug I mentioned like 30 minutes into the video, I think. Oddly, this isn't the only obscure piece of game knowledge that we will be referencing in this video, as there is actually one extremely niche bug that we could abuse to more or less trivialize the entire save. However, it's only going to be relevant near the very end of this video. But for the time being, just keep that fact in the back of your mind. Alrighty, so, Tainted Jacob. He's insane. Easily in our top 3 characters at our disposal. Although he kinda struggles against Mega Satan, like I said, it just isn't his time to shine, because he will absolutely decimate everything else that may stand in our way. Including all of the other end bosses. So, with that in mind, wouldn't it be really cool if we could unlock him extremely early into this playthrough? That sounds impossible. Like, in this very video, I've gone into a pretty fair amount of depth on just how much work it is to unlock the alt path and subsequently the ascent. But there is actually a glitch that makes Tainted Jacob a base character. Now, unfortunately, this requires you to play on a previous patch, but if you have no Tainted characters but manage to get into the Tainted screen and you press random, the game will always default to rolling to Tainted Jacob. I think it does this because he's the last character in the Who Am I sequence, but of course with that in mind, the question then arises, how do we get to the Tainted screen without having a Tainted character? Well, it's really quite simple. Firstly, do the Pacifism challenge until you beat Mom and Mom's Heart respectively, then pick Eden. Now, this step requires more RNG than the grade mode tangent I went on way earlier, as you need, and by that I mean you need, to roll into Glowing Hourglass. I mean, technically there is the alternative of finding a school bag, R-key, and Glowing Hourglass in the same run, but of course that requires you to not only get all 3 of those specific items, but you also have to, you know, be able to actually start the run. Which is kind of hard, as I've made blatantly clear already. Anyways, the reason why the Glowing Hourglass is so important for us is because the Glowing Hourglass is an item that allows you to turn back time and returns you to the previous room with all of the same attributes you had before you entered the room that you used the item in. With that in mind, if you use the Glowing Hourglass in the very first room of the game without going to any other room, that'll actually teleport you straight back to home. This is a really fun, albeit almost totally impossible and kind of detrimental Easter egg. You know, if possible, you probably want to avoid fighting an end boss before you pick up your first item. But in this extremely rare niche case, it can be used to massive effect. As I mentioned just a minute ago, the first time you enter home, you are guaranteed to find a red key, which will unlock this door right here and unlock Tainted Eden. If that was your only Eden token, good job. You can just exit the game and go back to the main menu. If it isn't, just commit suicide repeatedly or R-key until you don't have any Eden tokens. And congratulations! You can now go to the Tainted screen without any Tainted characters and random into Tainted Jacob 100% of the time. Which will obviously completely trivialize the earliest stages of the challenge, and I mean, really it'll actually trivialize most of the challenge. So, good job. You did it. Woo. Anyways, I don't think I need to say it outright, but that sounds fucking stupid. And I would never be able to pull that off without getting crucified by YouTube commenters. However, what if I told you that you can do this with another fantastic Tainted character? In the current patch of the game. Okay, hold on to your hats, because again, we need to get a glowing hourglass, R-key, and school bag. But we also need to find an Ankh. Luckily this isn't character specific, but if you felt like playing the damn watery, you could theoretically roll Eden with the impossibly specific start of 1 HP, a bomb, glowing hourglass, and an Ankh. If somebody wants to calculate the odds of getting that on a fresh save, please let me know. Assuming you prove your work and fact check it to verify that's correct, I will probably pin the first comment that gets it right. Anyways, we're activating the same Easter egg here again, but I think this might be the first time it's happened twice in the same video. We're breaking records here. You know, for somebody whose job is entirely reliant on speaking into a microphone for extended periods of time, maybe living right next to a train track wasn't the best call. Actually, come to think of it, I chose the worst of both worlds because I also live right next to the hospital, which not only has wee-woo ambulances, but also a helipad. I need to figure out how to speak German and get out of here ASAP. Can I change the game's language? This is an important question, actually. Google. There's no fucking way. Hold on. Oh, German's doing it again. The text is too goddamn big for the menus. I love Herausforderungen. No fucking way. Die, bestie. I don't want my bestie to die. Get the fuck out of here. My god, Die Bestie has Ultra Hungersnot at her disposal. We're fucked. Dear god, it gets worse. Ultra Todd is here. Sorry, I haven't made a joke about German in a few videos, and god, I fucking love the German language. Anyways, where are we at in the script? Oh yeah, again, we're activating the same Easter egg here, but now there's a new variable with the Ankh. That's because Blue Baby is a character that you will only see on the menu after you unlock him. Most characters you'll see even if you don't have them unlocked, but a select few only appear after unlocking them, which is extremely important for us. And what makes that extremely convenient for us is that Blue Baby is the only character in the game that you can play as before unlocking them, as Ankh is an available item you can find from the very beginning. There are other items that resurrect you as another character, but those items aren't able to be found if you don't have them unlocked, and predictably, their unlock method is tied to their character unlocks. So something like Lazarus's Rags, Judas's Shadow, or even Missing Poster are entirely ineligible for this. Ankh is the only exception. And what's really important for us is that if you transform into Blue Baby, just like every other item that transforms you into a different character, all of your unlocks for that run will be for Blue Baby. For an example of this that I desperately tried to make work in this run, if you start a run as Lilith, get the Ankh, die, and then beat Isaac, instead of unlocking Lilith's rune bag, you'll instead unlock the D6. Which really would have been the best of both worlds for us, as that means we get to utilize Lilith's extremely powerful toolkit, all the while being able to get Blue Baby's unlocks without, having to play Blue Baby. So, of course, with that in mind, we'll go through the same sequence of unlocking your Tainted character, this time going for Tainted Blue Baby, and we still don't have Blue Baby on the menu screen. But we have Tainted Blue Baby unlocked, which allows us to enter the Tainted character screen. So, what happens if we press random? Well, coincidentally, it rolls to the character that is next to Tainted Blue Baby on the start screen, Tainted Eve, who is actually one of our very best characters for this challenge. I don't know if I'd put her above Tainted Jacob, but I'd say she's above Bethany, which pretty much means she's in the top 3 best characters. She does have her own individual struggles that are unique to her, but her high roll potential is fucking insane. It's like playing a better version of Lilith. A much riskier variation of Lilith that requires a lot more micromanagement and consideration, but still ultimately a comparable character to Lilith, but if Incubus was a legal familiar to use, which would make her extremely strong. And hence because of that, Tainted Eve is extremely strong. Now, unfortunately this has very limited usability, as we do unlock Blue Baby by beating Mom's Heart 10 times, which is one of the first steps towards unlocking most of the end bosses. But before we would have to cross that road, we could actually get quite a few helpful unlocks because Tainted Eve is yet another character that can similarly start any run. And as I've already said, her scaling can be pretty insane for us. So, yeah. There's your obscure Isaac trivia for the day, I guess. Actually, one more thing before you go. Did you know that the icon for the Binding of Isaac changes whenever you alternate between Tainted and default characters? It took me way too long to realize that, and honestly, I think that's pretty freaking neat. I love little things like this in video games. Anyways, back to the realm of non-fiction. We're gonna fight Mega Satan, and for that, we're gonna be rolling with Tainted Isaac, who is a lot simpler to understand when compared to Jacob. His main selling point is that every item pedestal in the game will cycle between 2 items, which allows you to pick and choose much better items overall. Basically imagine if every item pedestal in the game came pre-equipped with a built-in, regret-free D6. Obviously that would be absurdly overpowered if there were no drawbacks tied to that, and honestly, even with drawbacks, he's still pretty insane. So to balance that out, he's locked to only having 8 items in total. 7 for us because the blindfold takes up another item slot, which is kind of inconvenient, but that's literally what we signed up for. After you fill up your inventory though, you can continue to pick up items, but you do have to swap it in with an item that you've already acquired. The main reason I decided to go with Tainted Isaac, other than just novelty, is because you retain the health gained from items even if you swap them out later. And with that in mind, realistically we're hardly ever going to have a run with more than 7 vital items. 7 good items? Yeah. 7 good items with maybe 2 to 5 incredible items? Yeah, I could also see that. Any more than that though? Yeah, I just don't really see happening. Anyways, the decision to use Tainted Isaac in particular was 100% the correct call, as our run started off on a goddamn insane note with our first item being Seraphim, our beloved. The first shop selling BFF, on sale by the way. Then the next 4 we got Lil Gish, which was a pretty handy plus, but wasn't quite super Seraphim. We also got our first key piece and a pretty decent chunk of soul hearts, which easily carried us into the depths where I found the potato peeler, which allows us to remove a red heart container for some damage, but so much more importantly for us, a cube of meat. The thing about Cube of Meat is that it's one of the very few items in Isaac that gains more benefits and powers the more of them you have. It starts off as an orbital that deflects projectiles and does 52 contact damage per second, which is okay, but unfortunately it's just too risky to utilize effectively. At 2 cubes of meat, that orbital now shoots tears, which isn't really all that great, but it's a pretty nice bonus, I guess. At 3 cubes, though, it becomes an entirely separate entity that chases down enemies and deals constant contact damage for roughly 12.5 DPS, which is actually extremely good. Its AI is fucking vicious. And the 4th cube simply doubles its DPS. However, if you keep going until you get 5 cubes, you'll get another base cube of meat, which can also be upgraded to its 4th level, or 8 cubes in this case. And the same thing applies to 9, 13, 17, and so on and so forth. And let me tell you, a tier 3 Super Meat Boy is pretty good. A Super Meat Boy? I mean, it's really good. A Super Meat Boy with BFF? As long as you let him do his thing and you don't just stand in the fire, you're probably going to win your run. 2 Super Meat Boys with BFF, though? I mean, just look at some of these fights. It isn't fucking fair. And the best part about all of this is that we effectively have 8 items for free. They don't show up in our inventory, they don't take up space. Yeah, we're getting to Mega Satan. It was never a question. Now, whether or not Mega Satan would put up some resistance or be an issue is an entirely different question, and... Hey game. Quick question real quick. What the fuck? Okay, yeah, I guess we're doing this. Frankly, our run is good, but it has room to be improved. Headless Baby isn't great. Hive Mind sadly isn't doing much for us. Lil Gish is surprisingly great come late game, but could definitely be improved upon, I guess. And Lil Delirium varies in quality a ton, but if it ever transforms into Incubus or Twisted Pair, we kinda just have to stop firing and do nothing for 10 seconds, which is really inconvenient. So, you know what? Yeah, we're doing this. Let's see what we can do here.
12 seconds later.
Alrighty, after decimating everything that dared stand in the way of our conquest, our new final loadout is Lil Brimstone, Quince, Lil Monstro, Seraphim, BFF, Holy Water, and Wafer. Altogether, a significant improvement over our last run, and... You know, based on my Tainted Jacob runs, I kind of figured that we should include the Wafer just in case things could still be a bit of a struggle. That was not the case at all. We entered the fight at full health, and by the time we beat Mega Satan, we only lost 1 heart out of 12. My sincerest condolences to this guy's dad, because holy fuck, he just got cyberbullied. Unfortunately, we didn't win the 50-50 roll on getting a Delirium portal, and having yet another Isaac run just completely steamroll him. But that's Mega Satan down for the count, and now we have our next character, Apollyon. We're not going to stay on Apollyon, as just like Jacob, we're primarily looking forward to his Tainted variant. But Apollyon is far from a bad character. I wouldn't call him great, but if you manage to find some decent active items for Void, especially early on, the sheer amount of resources it can produce can be exceptionally high. And for this run in particular, Although it wasn't some flashy, game-winning wombo combo, this run did start off with Guppy's Paw and Guppy's Head. And with our 120 volt, that really allowed us to take off. Fortunately this time around, unlike Jacob and Esau Hell, I only have to look after one character, with one health bar, and one hitbox, so the run was a lot smoother and a lot more relaxing. With a little bit of extra help from Seven Seals and Will Brimstone along the way, that was enough to get us back to home and we could finally unlock our boy. That being said, since I didn't get to go on a suicide run with Jacob and Esau, I decided to give Dogma and the Beast a try. And surprisingly, I did actually manage to kill Dogma. The Beast though, yeah, it took me 2.5 minutes to kill the first horseman. Out of 4. And of course there's the Beast immediately afterwards, so although I gave it a valiant attempt, I didn't stand a damn chance. It was fun though. But now we have Tainted Apollyon, which is near the same level, if not even better than Tainted Jacob. Tainted Apollyon starts off with Abyss, which is similar to Void in the fact that it'll consume items in the room for potential benefits. However, all items have been streamlined, as every item destroyed will now give you a locust that will launch itself in the direction that you're firing. There are a few items that give special effects, but they all share the common theme of locust. Obviously, the ability to benefit from every item pedestal that you find is obscenely good. Easily the best part about this by far, though, is after so many hours, damage finally becomes a tangible, reliable stat. I've already talked about damage in an earlier segment, but we've had a few decent items that scaled really well off of our damage. I mean, we literally unlocked Tainted Apollyon for one of those items, but every single locust that we have at our disposal scales directly off of our damage. As in, it's a 1-to-1 scaling. But it's actually even better than that because locusts have the additional benefit of also dealing their damage multiple times before being sent back to Apollyon. Consider that, and then consider that you're going to be accumulating a literal swarm of locusts with just how many items you're going to want to sacrifice to the Abyss. And we finally have our first character that genuinely feels like you're playing The Binding of Isaac. I mean, The Binding of Isaac with a ton of legal loopholes, sure, but do you know what the hallmark of me having fun in this game is? Re-rolling a perfectly valuable run for no other reason than it might be kind of funny. Of course, immediately afterwards, I died instantaneously, and honestly, it wasn't really all that funny, but the prospect of having fun was there, I guess. And then in the next run, fighting Hush, despite being in no way, shape, or form capable of actually defeating him. Did I die? Yeah. Did I have any reason to really fight him? Not really, no. Did I do it anyways? Yeah. It was pretty funny. My next run was a little bit more successful though, as I just went down to the Beast and kicked its ass. God, I love Tainted Apollyon. I'm going to be echoing this in my next video, but God, I fucking adore fictional swarms. Whether it be me and my friends making the Geneva Convention a checklist in our pursuit of annihilating those damn bugs, or alternatively speedrunning the Geneva Convention as those damn bugs, I'm always having a fun time. I just love Swarm. So, yeah, he's easily one of my top 5 characters for me outside of this challenge, and here, he's easily in the top 2. I'd say Tainted Jacob has a much better time early game, but Apollyon can just absolutely take off in runs to an extent that Jacob can't really compare to. In fact, on that note, while we're preparing for Delirium, let's go over the unofficial pacifism tier list. I'm not going to be discussing every individual pick, but F tier characters are characters that will make you become back your money. They're either absolutely horrible or even actively detrimental to play as. You really, really don't want any of these characters. D tier characters are characters that don't really have anything that makes them particularly stand out, or their positives aren't exclusive to them, or maybe their positives just aren't good, period, but they are playable characters. C tier characters are characters that have niche benefits that could be beneficial to a run, but are still significantly worse than any other option in B and above. B tier characters are characters that have very real and useful benefits in using. But just like C, they're relatively niche and aren't as overwhelmingly powerful as the next tiers. A tier characters are very much worth considering throughout most stages of the game. When played well or tactfully, overall they'll perform significantly better than anything from the last tiers. Then in S tier you have the three warlords: Tainted Eve, Tainted Apollyon, and Tainted Jacob. All of these start off with ways to do damage, ways to clean up early floors, and surprisingly great late game scaling. If A was a massive step up from B, S is leaps and bounds ahead of A. If given the option, you always want to be playing as one of these three characters. With that out of the way though, we only have two real challenges left with Delirium and Boss Rush. And technically, we still have to do Ultra Greedier. I'm not even going to bother with an Ultra Greedier segment though, because Lilith will just completely break it. Literally all you have to do is start Greed mode, run around in circles until everything spawns, proc your black hearts and nuke the room, pick up your coins, and try to find a way to proc camping Conception. If you roll into Leech, GG easy. Legitimately, that's pretty much it. Get a 1 in 6 roll and scale into infinity. Truthfully, the added difficulty doesn't really matter much if you just have 50 succubi bouncing around the room like a screensaver from hell. Delirium, though. Now, let me just state some facts here. The candidates for the worst bosses in gaming are pretty immense. The fact that I scripted that out, went to Google, looked up worst bosses in gaming to try and pull up some comparisons for Preamble, and the first result I see is Delirium, proves to me that my feelings aren't completely unfounded. This isn't a joke. Jesus Christ, what the fuck? You know what, I had 5 paragraphs here just talking about how much I hate Delirium, especially as somebody who really likes the high-risk, high-reward characters. But I really don't feel like I can say anything about this boss that hasn't been echoed thousands upon thousands of times by the entire Isaac community. I won't lie, I kind of regret the Sekiro statement from way earlier. Not because it means that I have to beat Delirium again. Twice, actually. But because Delirium as a boss is so poorly designed that I don't feel like it deserved a second release in this video. I don't know, to put it in FromSoft terms, imagine if the Elden Beast, the boss in an arena so obnoxiously large with AI so dedicated to flying away that a popular theory among the player base is that you were originally supposed to be able to fight this boss on horseback, didn't just fly away, but instantly teleported to a random section of the room which would entirely mitigate attack windows. And that it also had an extremely likely chance to just teleport right on top of you for massive unavoidable damage. And even ignoring the teleportation for a second, since it has boss armor, you couldn't just Comet or Hoarfrost stomp its ass straight to oblivion, instead being forced to just run around the arena dodging bullshit until you find an exceptionally rare opportunity to get any damage in. Yet, because it also teleports, you'll never be able to fully capitalize on any opportunity presented, and if you somehow do, your damage is almost completely mitigated because if you deal too much damage, the game can just decide that you're doing too much damage and nerf your damage into oblivion. And then the boss will just teleport to the other side of the multiverse, not before clipping into you, by the way, and you'll just wonder why the fuck you're playing this stupid-ass game. It's just not good. Legitimately, the only two sources of joy from this fight are the moments where Delirium will just glitch out and instantly lose 80% of its health bar like an idiot, and thinking to myself mid-combat, damn, this boss fucking sucks. Thank God Repentance happened and this wasn't the climax to one of the most beloved indie games of all time. Entirely brand new routes, with end bosses that don't suck, with tons of new floors and enemies, all the while more than doubling the amount of available characters, most of which are deeply beloved by the community, and adding in tons of new items, synergies, interactions, challenges, and goddamn multiplayer. Look, it was confirmed by Edmund McMillan that since he didn't want Repentance to just be a part of the extremely popular Anti-Birth mod, he threw in a bunch of planned elements for a future Binding of Isaac sequel, and that genuinely shows. Repentance is one of the very best pieces of DLC for a game I have ever played, and if for whatever reason you were on the fence about buying it, or even just the Binding of Isaac as a whole, I would sincerely recommend it. Anyways, going back to this shit of piece, I managed to cross this dude's name off of the list, and now all that's left is Boss Rush. There is no fucking way. I'm about to stage a goddamn intervention. Alright, Boss Rush. For this, we're not going to be utilizing Tainted Apollyon, despite being an absolute destroyer. It's unfortunate that we only unlock him in the final moments of the challenge, but honestly, from a content perspective, that's probably a good thing. The reason I didn't go in too much depth with the Delirium run, and actually also the Beast run, come to think of it, is because Tainted Apollyon does admittedly have very samey runs. Don't get me wrong, as I've made very clear, I absolutely adore him. Having an infinite legion of locusts at your command is really cool. But, like I said, any item that we come across that isn't beneficial to our run is just going to be consumed, which is about 60 to 80% of the items in the game. Depending on your run, it's probably a lot higher than that, actually. Like, mathematically, getting your 14th Locust isn't going to be as much of a DPS increase as your 2nd to 3rd, 3rd to 4th, and so on and so forth. But if your damage is high enough, it would likely be superior to get another Locust over most items in the game. Especially so if your run is doing well on health. Like, to sound slightly pretentious here, there's just a few Tainted characters that you can play as where you pretty much just play as that character instead of the Binding of Isaac. Which isn't a bad thing, don't get me wrong, I love to throw the skull, and I even enjoy playing Johnny Test Flipcrack.wave, but after enough runs, they do start to feel very homogenized, so it's probably not the most enjoyable thing to see as a viewer. So since we're approaching our last stretch, we may as well return to that initial rule set and make this Tainted Esau versus the world. In total, assuming we clear the boss rush a-okay, we also have to go back and re-clear Blue Baby, Mega Satan, Delirium, Hush, Mother, and the Beast. So we're going to be starting off with boss rush to more or less finish off our post-it note. Luckily, before I truly started the production of this video, I've had probably a solid 20 to 25 hours of practice runs where I tried to beat the game with exclusively Tainted Esau. So, although a good item would be really nice for us to find, it is far from mandatory for us to Alrighty, so that's boss rush over with. That's nice. Legitimately though, even outside of the obviously overpowered Nod Leaf, this run was just goddamn insane. Firstly, this might be the first run in this entire challenge where Saturnus was an invaluable asset to us. We did actually have a really decent Saturnus run earlier, but I made the very dumb decision of picking up Lodestone early on, which has some incredible counter synergy with Saturnus. That combo more or less magnetized enemies onto us, and although I desperately attempted to make it work, it was just a doomed run. So many unavoidable hits occurred because of that combo, and it was just way too much. This run, on the other hand, didn't feature such a blatantly stupid decision, which helped immensely with the enemies that Tainted Esau couldn't lock onto as well. But what tipped this run from extremely good to absolutely insane is Camo Undies. Do you know what would be really good in a run where we can't cry and is totally dependent on outside sources of damage because of that? A permanent stealth effect that lasts until we cry. Yeah, if being permanently stealthed with a load of high damage tiers orbiting us sounds good, believe it or not, that's because it is. If you really wanted to be pedantic, it did have some anti-synergy with Nod Leaf strats, as we do want enemies to get in melee range and, by proxy, in range of Dark Esau. But all that's required for us to utilize them together is to quickly use Anima Sola on Esau for invulnerability, cry on the nearest wall, and then quickly enter back into our statue form and continue the AFK strats. Since we're stealthed, we could also get very far away from enemies and potential attacks before doing that, so it was overall an immensely potent combo. That being said, Esau wasn't always reliable, as there is a traditionally extremely helpful feature where Esau won't charge at you if he's angled in a specific way, which he finds himself in constantly due to charging into an immovable object ad infinitum. Luckily, to counteract that, we did also manage to find Lil Delirium, which would occasionally transform into a vaguely helpful familiar. Usually it was entirely worthless, but as long as it had a chance to be something that could deal damage, we would inevitably Infinite Monkey Theorem our way to the end. Later on, we also found Sci-Fly, which helped deal with enemies that shot projectiles, and Cube of Meat helped with enemies that happened to be in melee range, but not in the trajectory of Esau's attacks or his general hitbox. So, yeah. That's boss rush down, and afterwards, everything up to Blue Baby was just a complete breeze. Although I do have to say, fuck this game for giving me the best AFK build I could ask for, and then having an opening chest for with Tech X, Rotten Baby, and Freezer Baby with Familiar Leash. In any other run, this would be an absolutely godly start to the chest, but here it felt like getting $1 million in a currency that is no longer circulated or accepted. It kinda broke my heart. Either way though, we just completely demolished Blue Baby, which means that we don't have to bother going after him anymore. Next time we get to the chest, if we choose to, we can just blitz straight to Mega Satan and skip the entire Oh damn. To be honest, I knew the 20% chance was possible, but I really didn't expect that. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take it. I kinda can't believe I'm saying this either, but Delirium's telefragging bullshit did actually help us out immensely here because, as it turns out, spawning right on top of Tainted Esau's true damage attacks kinda just melts your health bar. Who could've guessed? Well, I mean, after that, we're just looking at Mother, Mega Satan, the Beast, and Hush. So if I had to rank these by difficulty, easiest to hardest, I would probably go with the Beast, Hush, Mega Satan, and then Mother. So seeing as two of those paths are mutually exclusive, let's start off with the alt path just to make things a little bit easier for our future selves. While we're pulling this off, something I decided to do for this video because I am a perpetual victim of inserting feature creep into my life, is making a Google spreadsheet covering almost every character unlock in the game and ranking them on this scale. I decided to not include other unlocks because I found it kind of redundant. Like, maxing out the shop is cool, but it's less I'm going to go out of my way to accomplish this specific goal, and more so, I'm going to tune into an overly long video discussing something I have zero interest in while I farm the donation machine for 3 hours. You know what you're gonna get. But if, for whatever reason, you wanted to do a min-maxed run of the Pacifism of Isaac and get all the best character unlocks to maximize your runs, this would be a good place to start. On that note, I also have to give a massive thank you to Another Map Playing Isaac for providing me a spreadsheet template that I could expand upon by completely violating it. I mean, everybody has their own opinions, but come on. This man legitimately thinks Mom's Knife isn't a run-losing item. He also doesn't even think Immaculate and Cambion Conception are just automatic run-winning items, so I don't know if you should trust his judgment. Kinda seems like a little bit of a clown to me. Maybe a little bit of a goober. Nah, but seriously, if you want other legitimate guides on unlocks and stuff, I would highly recommend his channel. So, of course, alongside this objectively correct Isaac unlock tier list made by only the most informed and correct gamer, you can find his channel in the description below. Cheers. Anyways, getting back into the run, I suppose we can get into some problems with the alt path that I didn't really get to dive into since our Bethany run was so insane. I did briefly mention this, but we don't have the Mantle for the Lost unlocked, which means that getting the first knife piece can be extremely dangerous as we're only one hit away from dying at all times. Okay, I mean, there were some cool things I could highlight here. This room, for example, was fucking evil, but seriously, I don't know what I'm supposed to add here on a commentary note. We're over 2.5 hours in, and honestly, I kind of feel like I've exhausted the premise. And my throat. It is really sore. And I've been working on this video for the better part of 2 months now. I did not expect that at all. I kind of figured this would take a month. And now this video is 2.5 hours. I just feel like we've exhausted all of the content here. Don't get me wrong, I am going to fulfill the promise of doing these runs, which will be displayed on screen now. But after roughly 150 hours of general disdain, which is practically playing this game as a part-time job for 2 months, as well as countless more spent researching, scripting, voiceover-ing, video editing, photoshopping, proof watching, and so on and so forth, I think it's safe to say that, yes, you can, in fact, beat this game as a pacifist. And I would never recommend it. Seriously, even though I got some help, I shouldn't have spent 3 hours making this spreadsheet. I feel like I'm a meth dealer because you may start this challenge as a joke and actually get into it for some reason and ruin your life. And do you know who would be the sole person to blame there? Me. All of your problems would trace back to me. And I don't want to be the Binding of Isaac version of Walter White. I don't even get a lot of money from YouTube. I'm just a guy who does this for fun. Honestly, I have zero hope in this video doing well algorithmically. If you want to try and prevent that, that is totally up to you, but I kind of am Walter White because I did this for me. I liked it. I don't think I was good at it, but I did it. And I'm gonna finally become back my fucking money. I need to get out of this manic episode. Let's go to outro time. If you like my content and would like to support me directly, ignoring the fact that you even watching the video up to this point helps me out in more ways than you may believe, and that supporting me directly is never expected, You can join a bug cult alongside very helpful acolytes currently including, but limited to, Going to La La Land, Nicole, Andrew F., Blue Sailor, Morphous, Inferno Kieran, Lungulus, Zavbeto3, IKEA Enthusiast, Frank, Hannah K, Doke Dog, Mitchell M, Anon1, Al Diaz, Wumpus, Sam B, Zach M, Scremio, Teachy Boy, Darling Mim, Just a Plaid Shirt, Dan, Black Jade, Jacob S, Michael P, Breadman, Catapult Man 1, Chair, Judge and Jury, Skarner Crystalline, Teddy Pear, MOS, Mr. Bones, Pyromusical, Vegeta, Blazeheart, Luke GB, Cork Attack, and HKS Hornet. If you would like to be abducted into a cult that worships my dog and, among other things, receive monthly videos about him, early ad-free YouTube releases that are available whenever you want, an exclusive Discord server, the ability to commission absolute masterpieces of art and having your name read at the end of every video in an extremely monotone voice. Links will be in the description below to access to Patreon, or alternatively click the join button on YouTube to access most of the same perks. I also have a merchandise platform if you'd just like to buy a t-shirt, hoodie, or other miscellaneous items. I priced everything so that I only get a few bucks out of every purchase, so I pretty much consider it a neat little tip jar that you get something cool out of. Although I do desperately need to add something new. I haven't ran out of ideas, but I'm always wondering what I could potentially slap on a shirt. I don't know why I wrote that down and immediately thought of Shadow Davey, so maybe they'll return from the infinite dark to torment me just a little bit more. Who knows? Also, if you want to follow me on other social media platforms, link to those are in the description as well. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. This video came out a lot later than I anticipated, but I sincerely hope that 2024 is going off to a great start for you. And as always, my friends,
I hope you will in your next time a cow on a trash farm, you sucker.